The Waitangi Tribunal is sort of your voice in New Zealand. How far-reaching are the powers over the land, the water, the language? Is it completely out of control?
It's gone too far. Lack of transparency and integrity and honesty in our political system. We don't trust it. You have the common sense approach, you have this really nice revival of our culture and our language, and then you've got this other fraction that are just pushing it. They're the ones who are financially benefiting. Got a certain group of Māori who will be establishing these programs, clipping the ticket and creating another gravy train for themselves. And all that money, billions of dollars, are not making a difference at all.
I even make the argument the communists are almost using this as a face mask to seize control in Australia, get around the Constitution through this voice proposal, when in actuality it doesn't serve the Indigenous Australians at all.
I've been on the Māori roll. I've come off the Māori roll. I have several whānau members who have done the same thing. They felt the Māori candidates were not making any difference whatsoever for the well-being and improving the well-being of Māori. I don't see any value in having them, regardless of race, ethnicity. If the candidate is working for its people, all people would benefit. The candidates are connected to particular whānau, and they're the ones that are getting wealthy and the rest are not. If you want change, you have to be part of the change. You have to step up. You can only change the system by being inside it.
Dr. Wendy Gillespie is the one that understands where the bodies are buried in the government, basically. The idea that you would put it all on the line, your reputation, your profession, just to be dragged through the mud in the media. What is it that drives you and why are you doing this? Candace Owens once said, "The most controversial thing I've ever done was to decide to think with my brain instead of my skin tone." She was referring to the Democratic Party, and many in Australia would use that line to describe the way that Aboriginals are expected to vote for the Labor Party. On the 14th of October, Australia will vote on a voice referendum, whether we enshrine an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice into the Constitution to form a body. And the 14th of October also happens to be the same day that the New Zealand election is on, for their general election once every 3 years. New Zealand, funnily enough, has had a voice-like body since 1975 called the Waitangi Tribunal. My guest today, Dr. Wendy Gillespie, will be giving me an understanding of how Maori relations have gone in New Zealand, how some of these programs have gone in helping to close the gap, and whether the bubble in the centre of control in this country has actually helped improve Maori living standards. Wendy is running for the Leighton Baker Party in the upcoming election on the 14th of October. And as soon as I found out that, they were open to some conversations, I rushed over to New Zealand so that I could get the ammunition to defeat the voice in Australia, which is much more radical proposal than they have here, but also to better understand why Wendy's running and how Maori relations have gone in New Zealand. So, Dr. Wendy Gillespie, welcome to a conversation with Joel Jammal from Turning Point Australia.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Pleasure. You've spent 20 years working in the public sector and most recently working in the Human Rights Commission. My audience would probably have a lot of respect for you for resigning from the Human Rights Commission in 2021, August. Mm-hmm. Why did you resign? What was the trigger?
It was at the time when we were going through our COVID lockdowns, had just completed. We were protesting. The country was in arms around the lockdowns and the way that the people had been treated. And in my senior role at the Human Rights Commission, I believed we should be doing more to try and ease the turmoil between government and the people. That was not to come about and happen. And I was quite gravely disappointed and just felt that it wasn't the place that I thought it was and that I wanted to work in anymore.
In this country, would you agree that there's a view that Maori people have traditionally voted Labor and therefore should vote with Labor in this country?
Yeah, it has stemmed from the Ratana Church, which is the predominantly an early Māori religion, and from Labor being established in the 1930s, 40s, and being a government at that time, or a party at that time, for the people. And so that's where it stems from. It's very much from our older people, our kaumātua kuia, who believe and follow the Labour Party policies. I'm not sure that's the same anymore, that the younger generations of Māori are more thoughtful about what's going on in our environment.
The reason I started with a quote from Candace Owens is I do feel that there is an obligation for people to think with their skin, at least when they're told by the white liberals, the white lefties. And if you don't, then you're somehow described as a coconut or something, you know, brown on the outside, white on the inside. Why is it these insults often come from those that disagree with us from the Labour Party or the left wing, especially on topics like co-governance, for example? Like you're a racist, for example, which is what Leighton Baker, he's had that accusation thrown at him because he's a white guy and happens to say, I don't think we're spending the money to help Maori people efficiently. Apparently he's a racist. I mean, what do you put that down to?
So I believe that that's just rhetoric of the government, who are creating divisive policies, and they have successive governments throughout for the last 30 years and since 1975 certainly, where they're causing division intentionally between us, between Māori, non-Māori, and all the different ethnicities we have in New Zealand. We're a melting pot, and we have traditionally been a really well-grouped community and supportive of each other regardless. And we have had very little racism between all races in New Zealand. And it's through the government policies over the last few years that have really ramped up and caused division. You know, the people who want us to be divided are making those accusations, because everyday normal Kiwis, Māori as well, don't want to be separate. We don't want to be classed as you know, lower class because we've got brown skin. You know, we want to be able to grow and thrive on our own rights, in our own rights. And so it's just another divisionary separatist tactic by government and by those who are going to benefit from that division.
Oh, we're totally on the same page. I even make the argument that the communists are almost using this as a face mask to seize control in Australia, get around the Constitution through this voice proposal, when in actuality it doesn't serve the Indigenous Australians at all. Some $40 billion are spent every year on Australian programs for Aboriginal people through the taxpayers, and 550 million of which since 2005 has gone to organisations that Noel Pearson runs, for example. A lot of taxpayers are scratching their heads and wondering, well, what do you have to show for it? You know, if this was the CEO of a board or a board, you'd sack the CEO, you'd sack the board just based on competence. Do you have a similar sort of race hustler sort of industry here where people are using the Maori plight and the gap to say that they're going to solve the problems, but they don't actually come up with anything? Is that a thing?
Yeah, definitely. Joel, we have a lot of Māori, and I don't like using the word elitism because that just automatically creates a separatist kind of view. But there are certainly Māori iwi members who have the right surname, and they benefit substantially from the treaty payouts and from having government programs and funding diverted through their whānau programs. And yet we see over the last 30 years that there's still so significant Māori poverty. We've got youth, Māori youth, who would benefit from being in Māori-led youth programs, but they're not. That money's not trickling down to the front line, to the people. You know, Māori health clinics, the money is stopping at there's bureaucracy in layers in Māoridom, and that money is not getting out to the everyday normal Māori anyway. So, it's a gravy train.
Yeah. How far-reaching is the Waitangi Tribunal? So the Waitangi Tribunal I mentioned earlier, it's sort of your voice in New Zealand. how far-reaching are the powers over the land, the water, and the language? I mean, is it completely out of control?
You know, I think there's some really good things that the tribunal have done, or the governments successively have done, in terms of reinvigorating our culture and our language, because it was at risk of being lost. But there's this fraction that have pushed it too far, where they want to make, for example, te reo compulsory for everyone. Well, I am, as an adult, just learning my language, te reo, and I'm not being forced to it. I'm not being made to do it. I want to do it because I've got time, because I've got the will. And I certainly don't want my taxpaying money paying for someone to be forced to learn te reo when they don't want to. And to me, I just see it as another way in which you've got probably a certain group of Māori who will be establishing these programs, who will be clipping the ticket and creating another gravy train for themselves, when realistically and common sense prevails. You know, you cannot make it compulsory. Sure, a little bit in schools and primary schools, but you can't make it compulsory across the whole country. It's just a gravy train, another gravy train.
Yeah, I was talking to Leighton. I mean, there's some crazy stuff, stories of, guys trying to take their pregnant wives in labour, frantically trying to find the hospital, trying to read the road signs. The road signs aren't in English, and the poor guy's just trying to find a hospital. Just absolute madness. I mean, we don't really
It's gone too far. You have the common sense approach, you have this really nice revival of our culture and our language, and then you've got this other fraction that are just pushing it that far. And they're the ones who are financially benefiting from that push, that extra drive.
Yeah, we're seeing it just start to creep in now in Australia. Some of our suburbs, like my suburb of Parramatta, no worries. It's always been called Parramatta. We don't have to change anything. Aboriginal name. Whereas they're looking at changing the name of Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne, and no one asked to the Aboriginal name. It's like, why are we doing this? It's history. Just leave it. Like, we don't have to sort of, we're not more accepting. We didn't just cure and close the gap by changing the name of a city. But I don't know, that's my view anyway. Do you believe there should be a co-governance sort of audit to really get an understanding of how much money is being spent on supposed Maori problems to close the gap and improve living standards?
In a way, we have a pragmatic way of co-governance at the community level. So a lot of social programs are already being implemented by Māori, by iwi providers and Māori. And I have worked in a few Māori NGOs, charities, in social services. The co-governance that they're creating or proposing to create, I think, is just a diversion away from privatisation of assets, from a perspective of, again, these particular whānau within iwi will benefit from that co-governance, and the rest of us Māori and communities and non-Māori will not benefit from having, it creates just a duplication of bureaucracy where the money is wasted at that level and doesn't go out to the front line where it should be.
Right. Well, I mean, you're Maori. You understand, what's actually making a difference, what isn't. Since the 1800s, the Maori have had these Maori-only electorates. People can opt into being on the Maori roll versus being on the non-Maori roll, which allows them to vote in these 7 electorates for this upcoming election on the 14th of October. Do you think that it was a mistake to keep those electorates around? Do you think that they should be abolished and we should just have the existing electorates for everyone?
I've been on the Māori roll, and I've come off the Māori roll, and I have several whānau members who have done the same thing because they felt that the Māori candidates were not making any difference whatsoever for the well-being and improving the well-being of Māori. I don't see any value in having them. I think that regardless of race, ethnicity, if the candidate is working for its people, all people would benefit. But we have, again, the candidates are connected to particular whānau member names, and they're the ones that are getting wealthy, and the rest are not. You know, it's not filtering down. They're not doing, you know, as a candidate should, what they're saying they're doing and for their people. So regardless of what race you are, you're meant to be here as a candidate working for your people. You know, all people. Doesn't matter what colour skin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you think that it's probably best to remove those electorates? Or do you think there's actually novelty in keeping them to show that having Maori electorates actually doesn't actually solve the problem?
You should never do anything for the novelty of it.
Yeah, you really shouldn't.
No,
should
you shouldn't.
Yeah. But it's proven that it sort of hasn't worked, right?
Here's a thought. So if a Māori candidate was running for the general election as a general candidate, and they were really, you know, had the trust and confidence of their people that they were going to do, you know, the general population, they would be voted in, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to say, you wouldn't have to create a separate seat.
Yeah.
So, and we have Māori MPs in the general...
Leader of the ACT Party, right?
Exactly.
And also New Zealand First.
Yep. Yeah, we have Māori and, you know, Māori in the general electorate because they are trusted in that and believe that they're going to do something for the people in the general electorate. Yeah.
It's the crazy thing because in Australia, Aboriginals, it's an inflated number, but they supposedly make up something like 3.5% of the population. It's massively inflated. But the amount of parliamentarians that are Aboriginal are over 4.6%. So they're actually overrepresented. So if we really want to do quotas, men and women quotas, you know, Aboriginal quotas, we actually should really take a couple off. But I obviously disagree with that because, as the quote I started with said, you don't think with your skin colour. You don't.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and I look at this sort of idea of dividing us along skin colour lines, eyebrow lines, nose lines, and I'm just like, this is divide and conquer, surely. This is some Hillary Clinton style, conquering the new world sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What have you found that has actually helped the Maori people in New Zealand? Because obviously there's been a lot done. Some's helped, some hasn't. Everyone's quick to point to what hasn't happened and worked. What do you think's worked?
I think when you have a minister or cabinet ministers who are there for the people and not for a party, there are very few that I would say who are delivering for the people and not around party rhetoric. So, but when you do see it, it's so we had Tariana Turia. It was a great lady, and even though she was in a party, she really believed in the people. If you Google search her, she is amazing. She's kind of like the Nelson, in my eyes, a Nelson Mandela of Māori politicians. But they are very few and far between.
Well, one of my concerns in Australia is we're looking at the polling right now. It's very difficult to get a referendum up because you need a majority across the nation and a majority of states, 4 of the states to vote yes. And it's looking like the polling's indicating it's going to fail. Now, obviously, we've got 5 weeks until the New Zealand election and the voice referendum vote. My fear is, I think beating this thing is the easy part. The hard part is picking up the pieces after it.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a prime minister which made it his top priority to divide the country on this referendum that ended up failing. So he's out of touch. I would love to roll out a program the week after the referendum and saying, hey, look, we just spent 12 months trying to beat you on this, but here's how we're going to fix the problem. Now that the Prime Minister's sort of been, you sit there, Prime Minister, you don't know how to help the Aboriginal people. Now we're actually going to employ some people power. What does that look like tangibly in terms of helping, you know, Maori communities, for example?
What I found over the 20-odd years working in central government and frontline government to central government is the programs that worked well for Māori were the ones that were designed with Māori and non-Māori service delivery as the lead of that program development and not policy and bureaucrats. When it was created through that lens, it had such a party policy perspective. It didn't actually have any outcomes and make any difference at all on the ground, and yet hundreds of millions of dollars were spent. And years went by where there was just no outcomes, no improvement to truancy, or no outcomes or improvement to child morbidity, and no improvement in education outcomes. And, so when you have, you can have the Aboriginal community developing those programs with the community providers who are either Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, that diversity, because let's face it, Māori, we live in diverse communities. We don't live in an insular, little group, and neither do Aborigines, I imagine. So it's about the diversity of people's perspectives on the ground to design those programs and implement them and let them go for it. Stop the overreach and government bureaucracy from Wellington dictating what should be done. And that's with a lot of our decisions in our health sector, our education sector, business, employment, everything. We have such a centralised bureaucracy making decisions for our regions and on the ground, that the programs and all that money, billions of dollars of public spend, are not making a difference at all.
It is quite sad because you understand the opportunity cost. I trust you more with $1 million to spend it in a Māori community than Hipkins. He has no idea.
No.
He doesn't even know what a woman is.
No.
Wendy, you've had quite a distinguished career, 20 years working in the public service in the government, among other places as well as an academic. You've resigned from the Human Rights Commission after working there for 2 to 3 years on principle. Why are you running? The idea that you would put it all on the line, your reputation, your profession, just to be dragged through the mud in the media. What is it that drives you, and why are you doing this?
If you want change, you have to be part of the change. You have to step up. If you want something different, if we want something different come the 14th of October, then change the way you vote, because we're not going to get anything different if you choose a red or a blue tick. There are so many good people out there who are community-based people, who are builders, doctors, nurses, teachers, police, who are really passionate about their communities, their businesses, where they are, and they are not career politicians. We don't want to be career politicians, but we want to make a difference, and we want to make a change. And we've seen too much of New Zealand be sold away, lack of transparency and integrity and honesty in our political system. We don't trust it. And this is the only way that we can change it, is by being inside the system. You can only change the system by being inside it. So sure, no one in their right mind would want to get into politics. Life is too short, but that's the only way is to make a change, is to try and get in there and change the system from within. And fortunately, I've been in roles where I've reviewed government departments, I've helped establish them, I've done a lot of change management programs in them, I've written policy and reported to ministers, and been a teacher and done, a counsellor for women and children at the front line. I've seen it right from the best and the worst of human behaviour, and we have to make this is an important election for us. If we wait another 3 years, there's so much more that will have to be undone, and we've already travelled too far along a particular road of the governments, successive governments, National and Labour, have taken turns at selling off our assets, selling off our primary sectors, our primary sectors of eggs, dairy, kiwi fruit, everything has been privatised and sold off to a lot of overseas international investment firms and other governments. And it's made affordability and living in New Zealand so difficult. So we have to peel that back again and get New Zealand's self-sufficiency and the Kiwiana way of life back again, where the government through COVID did dob in your neighbour kind of thing. That's not what Kiwis are about and New Zealand is about. So we have to get that back. So passionate about getting our country back the way it was in terms of our community feel and caring for each other, and growing our youth and growing our communities forward. But it's going to take a system change.
No doubt. I was talking to Leighton Baker, your party leader, just a second ago, and I said, so let me get this right. Dr. Wendy Gillespie is the one that understands where the bodies are buried in the government, basically, and can actually bring some serious change and reforming and making it more efficient. And he said, absolutely, that's why she would be an absolute weapon in the government. She would do very well in the parliament and help highlight how we can improve, Maori living standards, all New Zealand living standards, and create a better New Zealand, get it back to something that we all feel nostalgic for.
Yeah.
Was there anything else specifically you would like to tell, perhaps the people of New Zealand and even the people of Australia with the referendum coming up?
I think just have faith and trust and keep pushing for integrity, because we deserve to have integrity in our political systems and our political leaders, and they are there for us. They are there for us, the people. It's not the other way around. So push and demand democracy, demand having a voice, demand transparency and accountability and integrity, because we deserve it. And that's what our grandkids, our families, our grandkids, great-grandkids deserve, that kind of life, and country.
Absolutely. Well, look, I have utmost respect for anyone that's willing to put their money where their mouth is, per se, and literally and run in elections and put their name out there to be attacked by the corporate media. But I take my hat off to you, Dr. Wendy Gillespie. You've got some guts, more than I know than most men, and I wish you the best of luck in this election. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
It is a really important election for us, this one. I feel people in my family, they're all down-to-earth ground. No one's ever been to university in my family. We're all from blue-collar workers, and everyone just said, when I said to my family, I'm thinking about getting into politics, and they go, oh, you've got to do it. You've got to do it. My son said, Mama, you've got to do it because you know how the system works, government. He said, not many people will know what you know.
That's right. You're dangerous.
Yeah.
It takes so long to train someone up like you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've done a lot of research of the other government systems that could actually, if we could get rid of the bureaucracy that is there and simplify and just have a people's-led government without party politics, it would be a great thing. People are elected for the strength they bring to the job. Rather than the party rhetoric, which we know is, in our case, for both National and Labour, is to do the bidding of someone overseas, or groups, international groups overseas.
Right.
So, interesting times.
No one wants their brand to be damaged by the others, which I understand. But
for the greater good, eh?
Well, these are the rules. I wish you guys had preferential voting, but even in Australia, there's so much wastage with preferential voting, because sometimes people don't vote all the minor freedom parties first. They actually, they go, oh, well, look, I put you as number 2. I put Liberal first, the Conservative Party. And we're like, no, that's not how it works. It won't flow to us, basically. Yeah. And so that's where...
they have that view here. A lot of people say, oh, isn't the vote for a small party a waste of vote? I said, not if that party gets 158,000 votes. All of a sudden, they've got 6 MPs. So if you thought 158,000 voters in a pool of 3 million, it's nothing. So I said the only reason you think that is that's what the media and the government want you to think, that a vote for a small party is wasting your vote. Well, it's not, because if everyone voted small parties, all of a sudden you've got quite a few more bigger parties, better mix. So...
Yeah, well, I mean, if you win your electorate, then Leighton gets up, but that's very difficult. Winning an electorate doesn't matter if you're in the UK, Australia, USA. It's very difficult to win an electorate. But,
and I did think about, well, maybe if you should have joined Labour or National and then just cross the floor. But then you have to have the party in, you see.
That's right. You have to, Yeah. That's the challenge.
But then that's not the honest way that you do. You should be doing it anyway, but no, because that's the way others have done it before.
The way I see it, the rules are stacked so that minor parties can't come up. You guys are playing it on hard mode. Yeah. Like, I look at it and I'm like, wow, thank God we don't have these rules. I mean, You guys don't even get funding. Like, we get funding even if we get above 4%, even in an electoral race, if you get above 4%, you get, depending on the election, you could get $4, $5.
Yeah.
That helps you recoup some costs. So what the parties do is they take out loans based off previous elections from the banks. The banks give them loans because they know they'll get it back. So you have the money up front.
No, my signs came out of my savings account.
There you go.
Get about to put our signs up next weekend when I go home. So and my signs are really Leighton Baker, and my picture's very small. If anything, I know I won't win my electorate, but if I can push the party and talk about the party and talk about people, and integrity and bringing back integrity into the political system,